Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Patrick McKeown here. And the whole topic of conversation is about the application of breathing exercise for endurance. So that's going to apply across all sports, endurance-based. And we're also going to be joined by Barry Monaghan. And Barry will give his insight into the application of breathing in terms of his work. So before we start, I'd just kind of like to get an idea of where people are coming in from, just to get a sense of it. So Andy Zero Human, where are you coming in from? What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?
Hi, Patrick. Nice to meet everybody as well. Yeah, I work in the space of human optimization, and breathwork plays a huge part of that. I work with elite athletes all the way through to corporate high flyers in inverted commas, but also I run men's retreats, and I find breathwork is a huge gateway to many things, but actually specifically helping guys get out of this thing and
Yeah,
deeper into the body. But I'm really interested today because I'm heading to the UTMB in a couple of weeks to work with a load of competitors at high altitude doing the race there. So I thought I would tap into this and got your book on
great.
Audible as well. So thank you.
I I won't be able to cover altitude, breathing for altitude, but it is part of what we do.
Yeah.
I won't, it's just outside the remit of today. I just won't be able to get into it. So good. Thanks, Sandy. Tim Hughes, how are you?
Great.
You're mute.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Patrick.
So you're jumping in for endurance. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Great, great. Thanks very much, Tim. Barry,
Padraig, how are you?
good, Barry. So it'll be about 15 minutes or so, and what I'll do is bring you in. So what I'm going to do is just I'll come back to you, Barry. So I'll just get kind of a little bit of an insight. There's another Barry on top in middle with a tree in his background. I'm just wondering where are you coming in from, Barry? What do you do?
Me?
That's you. Yeah,
I live in Aviemore in Scotland, if you know that place.
I know
Uh,
Scotland.
yeah, well, this is the Highlands. I do stuff like Norseman, Celtman, and all that kind of stuff. That's my interest in this.
Great, great stuff. Kieran Lewis, where are you coming in from? What do you do?
Hi Patrick,
Hey.
I'm based in Bedford, near and just north of London, and I'm a keen masters racing cyclist. I'm also a British cycling accredited coach. Uh, I've got a keen interest in performance cycling and using different analytics for that. And I'm really enjoying the breathwork part of incorporating that into my own training. Uh, and if you've seen the Tour de France over the last couple of weeks, you'll see the incredible number of cyclists that are now using nasal strips, which relates to the topic. And I know you've been over there, Patrick, for the opening at Lille. So I see it explode in cycling in the years ahead, which is why I'm here.
Great stuff, Kieran. Stay in touch. Great, great. Thanks for being here. Simon, where are you coming in from? What do you do?
Hi everyone. I'm down in Cornwall now, although we used to live up in the Highlands of Scotland near Nairn. 10 years up there. It's a great place. Loved
You
it.
moved down for the sunshine, was it?
Although apparently it's really hot up there, isn't it now? Um, I work predominantly in mental health, so I'm one-to-one therapist really with folks specialize in kind of hypnotherapy, cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy and stress management. But I'm kind of moving, I've started doing a lot of rowing recently. And I'm trained as an advanced level with you guys. So I'm kind of wanting to take it to just a slightly different kind of clientele and kind of just getting used to what all that means, really.
Great. Great stuff, Simon. And Nikki Balderson, where are you coming in from? What do you do?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm coming in from Washington, D.C. I'm an integrative health practitioner, so I do functional medicine testing, but I try to focus as much as I can with athletes, the midlife athletes, so optimizing really the foundations. I found you about 9 months ago, and I'm absolutely hooked. Got to spend several days with you at your home and in your office training with you in March. And my life hasn't been the same since. So
Great
anytime
stuff.
I get to hear you speak, I'm on. So
Lovely.
thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much for joining us again, Nikki. Thank you. And just last person would be, say, Mark Hendrik, and then we'll kick off. Hi, Mark. Sorry there, I think you're muted. Not to worry, Mark. That's all right. Don't worry. You can put it into the chat. Everybody will see it. Okay, so we'll start. So thanks very much for joining us. This is a slightly different take in terms of breathing. I'm always intrigued when people talk and they say that they're doing breath work. What does it exactly mean? So what I'm hoping to bring to the table is the experience that I developed over the last 23 years teaching breathing and teaching it in a high performance setting since 2013. And that came about by accident because I was working with the application of breathing for health issues from 2002 up until about 2013. Now I still do, but I remember working with people with anxiety, and I was putting out classes there, getting people out of their heads, as Andy was talking about earlier on, and giving them the tools to be able to self-regulate and to reduce rumination and all of those things to help deal with anxiety. But men weren't showing up. So, and it was on the back of that I said, we really need to have a breathing program specifically for men. Now, that was the origins of Oxygen Advantage, because we were able to get that same information that I was using in a healthcare setting and change the language and change some of the exercises and adapt them to a high performance setting. So that got men in the door, and it became very popular. The book itself sold in English, it sold over 500,000 copies. It's published in 16 languages, so I don't know what the total sales are. But when men get in the door, then I was able to get them out of their head. So there's a few aspects to it. This is mind, body, and sport in the application of endurance. And we're talking about all sports, really. So I know there's an emphasis here in cycling and running, etc. And these are some of the things that I will be going through. So as I said, I'm the creator of Oxygen Advantage. I'm joined by Neve. So Neve is here, Neve Colfer, and she's here to help answer any questions that you might have. So we're one of the largest breathing schools in the world, if not by number. We have about 13,000 people who have gone through our program. So I think in terms of numbers, we are probably the largest breathing school in the world. So if we take a look at this image here, each person is going to tell a totally different story. So you see the girl in green. She looks very calm, composed. She's running with her mouth closed. She looks efficient with her breathing. She's not expending energy unnecessary. You know that she's not going to gas out. You know that she's not wasting energy unnecessary, as I said. And then if we look at the girl in red, so she is really panting. She's breathing hard for a given intensity and duration of physical exercise. Now, both of these athletes could be the same age. They could have the same training. They could be the same fitness, same willpower. But what differentiates one athlete from the other is breathlessness. Now, breathlessness will feed into the rate of perceived exertion. So irrespective of what the heart rate is saying, if breathing is hard, the brain is going to listen. So that's what I want to look at here. Is there a way then of targeting breathlessness? Is there a way of moving from what the girl in red is doing to the girl in green is doing? And in order to target that, you don't target that by doing physical training alone. If you want to reduce the sensation of breathlessness during sports, you have to target breathlessness itself. So these are the primary drivers to breathe. And there's a number of them. And you can do your own research on these. The primary one is CO2 sensitivity. So the accumulation of the gas carbon dioxide in the lungs and blood. The brain is very sensitive to the buildup of CO2, and even a small increase of CO2 will trigger breathing. Now, during physical exercise, of course, your metabolism produces quite an abundance of carbon dioxide. And it's not just the carbon dioxide as this waste gas. We only breathe to get rid of about 15% of it. So we actually hold on to 85%. But our sensitivity to the gas carbon dioxide is going to influence how hard and fast we breathe during physical exercise. The second thing that we need to look at is the ventilatory pattern. So the ventilatory pattern is the person's everyday breathing pattern. How are they breathing from a biochemical point of view, biomechanical point of view and a psychophysiological point of view? Or for example, do they have dysfunctional breathing? Because however you breathe during rest isn't going to suddenly fix itself going into sports. And as I said, physical training doesn't train your breathing. The acid-base balance, again, we're talking here about pH. If an individual, say, for example, is over-breathing, and if they're really pushing themselves during physical exercise, and imagine that they are breathing more air than what they should do, that in turn is going to get rid of too much carbon dioxide, which can happen, which in turn increases blood pH. That's going to affect brain cell excitability. It's also, the increase of blood pH is also going to cause the blood to hold on to oxygen more readily. And blood vessels narrow, well, that's going to be related to the lowering of CO2. Now, O2 delivery is really, from physical training point of view, of course, is improving endurance, strengthening the heart, for the body to be able to push itself harder, but breathing also plays a role here. It's never just about the air that you take into your nose or mouth. You always have to be thinking about downstream, and I want to come to that as well. So another factor that feeds into breathlessness is respiratory muscles. How well trained are they? How strong are they? How well are they functioning? And the respiratory muscles too are prone to fatigue. And if the respiratory muscle fatigues, especially the diaphragm is the main breathing muscle, blood is stolen from the legs to feed the diaphragm. And then you've got the last one, you have the psychological perception of breathlessness. Because if you really feel that air hunger or the sensation of breathlessness is really high, that's going to trigger you to slow down or to cease your exercise. So there's a number of different drivers to breathe there that are feeding into the sensation of breathlessness during physical exercise. Now, the columns in white are the impact of physical training on those drivers to breathe. So you can see in terms of CO2 sensitivity, physical training doesn't make much of a dent. Ventilatory pattern is not going to make much of a dent. Acid-base balance, it doesn't make much of a dent. O2 delivery, yes, it does. Respiratory muscle fatigue, physical training doesn't make much of a dent. And the psychological perception of breathlessness, physical training doesn't make much of a dent. So if you want to target breathlessness in sports, you need to target the breathing system. And you can see then the application of different breathing exercise. And by the way, not all breathing exercises are the same. You could say that you're doing breath work. And I could ask you, well, what are you doing? You're saying, well, I'm doing hyperventilation. I'm doing hyperventilation and then I'm doing long breath holds. Okay, then you have to ask the question, is that particular breathing pattern, what's that aimed at? Is that going to help any of those drivers to breathe air? The hyperventilation, yeah, it may, in terms of it'll target the respiratory muscle fatigue because it will strengthen the diaphragm. But we can get so much more out of improving everyday breathing patterns and also doing dynamic breath holds. And that's what I want to break down too. So always when you ask about breathing or when you think about breathing, ask how targeted is the breathing exercise to what you want to achieve. And in this instance here, we are looking at reducing breathlessness during physical exercise. So probably the biggest impact, psychological perception is quite a big one as well. And what you can do with breathing is you can really generate strong feelings of air hunger to train the brain not to react to discomfort. Because air hunger is a primal fear. And, you know, of the basic fears that we have, say, fear of lack of food is one, hunger for food, hunger for water, thirst is another one. But the biggest of all is hunger for air. So we do need to train that and to train it very, very deliberately. Now, also the other thing when it comes to breathing that's often overlooked is it's not necessarily about breathing more air. You could breathe more air, but it doesn't mean that you have more oxygen getting to the working muscles. You could breathe more air, but it doesn't mean that your circulation, your blood circulation is improving. So we have to be thinking about how can we breathe to influence every stage here. So if, for example, most people will focus on breathing and they focus on stage 1 here. How fast is the person breathing? How hard is the person breathing? What's minute volume? And for example, more recently in this recent Tour de France, which I was there just for the opening with Barry Monaghan, there was an event just a couple of days prior to it. And a lot of the riders, or at least some of them, and one team at least, is wearing time wear. So they're wearing a device in their shirt to specifically measure in real time how fast and how hard are they breathing. And it provides data that's really, really important because they can assess that against performance. But that's only looking at stage one. We need to ask the question, can we change our breathing patterns to improve alveolar ventilation? Or is the person breathing very inefficient that they're losing a lot of air to dead space? And the third aspect then is we have to ask as well, can we influence oxygen transfer from the lungs into the blood? Because ultimately, the function of breathing is to make sure, at least a major function of breathing, is to make sure that we get adequate oxygen to where it's needed. And that's where number 4 comes in. So even when oxygen is being carried in the blood, is there a way to influence oxygen delivery there? Is there a way to influence your blood circulation? And the answer is yes. So whenever you think about breathing, always think downstream. And each one of those stages can be improved. So the basics of foundational breathing look at 3 different dimensions. Biochemical dimension is looking at carbon dioxide. And that's also going to include your carbon dioxide sensitivity, your sensitivity to carbon dioxide, or your tolerance to the accumulation of CO2. Now, outstanding athletes should have a very high tolerance of carbon dioxide. So in other words, they can tolerate a reasonably high pressure of the gas carbon dioxide in their blood, and they can do physical exercise and they can cope with that, and that their ventilation isn't going to take off in response to it. The biomechanical is looking at the diaphragm. It's looking at the breathing muscles. Is there free movement of the diaphragm? You know, in terms of respiration, when the diaphragm is moving downwards, there's a negative pressure in the thorax, but there's a positive pressure in the abdomen. And also during expiration, for the diaphragm to move back to its resting position. And it's very important that the diaphragm does move back to its resting position, because that in turn is going to influence what's called the zone of apposition, which influences the generation of intra-abdominal pressure. So the benefit of that is that stabilization of the spine is provided by good recruitment of the diaphragm. But if you think of a lot of sports, and especially if you're thinking about cycling and you're hunched over on a bike, you've got restricted diaphragm movement. So is that then going to cause the cyclist to be breathing more in the upper chest? And one study in Japan looked at 1,933 athletes, and it concluded, you'll find the study, it was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in 2022. It concluded that 90% of athletes have dysfunctional breathing from a biomechanical point of view. Now, what does that mean? If you are breathing high in the upper chest and you have a reduced recruitment of the diaphragm, it affects your movement. So if you have dysfunctional breathing, you have dysfunctional movement. And if you have dysfunctional movement, you're at a greater risk of injury. So you might never associate how you breathe and your everyday breathing patterns with injury, but there could be a role there. And there's papers showing that and papers supporting it. The psychophysiological dimension is the mind-body connection. So we have a tremendous resource when we focus on the breath. We can really, really, self-regulate, and we can recover. We can increase, for example, or optimize heart rate variability. We can optimize our sleep quality. Because again, if somebody has dysfunctional breathing, it can impact their sleep, especially if they're mouth breathing during sleep. I've just written a new book on sleep, if you want to delve into the science of it. It's called The Breathing Cure for Better Sleep. And I'm currently writing a chapter for a medical textbook looking at the application of breathing re-education in sleep disorders. But sleep disorders aren't just reserved for people who are overweight and people who are over 40. A lot of athletes are prone to sleep disorders because athletes have perfectionist tendencies. That's what's driving them there, and they may feel apprehensive about it in an event the following day. And is that going to impact their performance? So whenever you think about breathing, you have to think about states of mind. And whenever we're thinking about states of mind and we're thinking about, well, it's optimal if we can access flow states. If we can switch on and bring that athlete into flow very, very quickly. And that's something that's at our disposal. But I will say this, if an athlete has dysfunctional breathing, they're more likely to be in an increased stress response, and increased stress and anxiety is going to sabotage flow. But another aspect is, I don't think that we can access flow states if we have this poor sleep. And here's the connection then between breathing and sleep. So I think we need to go beyond and look at, in in terms of what we can do with breathing and how then that can influence our states of mind, our concentration, our attention span, our flow states, our ability to recover. All of that, of course, is very important. So I kind of briefly mentioned that, you know, if you do have restricted breathing from a biomechanical point of view, it can't send your breathing up into the chest. Then your breathing could be faster and harder. You could be hyperventilating. You could be breathing more air than what you need, because it's never just about the respiratory rate. How much air do you need for a given intensity and duration of physical exercise? So think back to the two runners. The lady in green, she's got very calm breathing, controlled breathing. And by the way, that image there is taken from an image of two 400-meter sprinters in, I think it was either, I'm not sure which Olympics it was, but it might have been Rio. But basically, the runner in green, if you look at Sonia Ross-Richards or Sonia Richards-Ross, so she's a 400-meter sprinter, she's a black lady, and she runs 400 meters with her mouth closed. So that wasn't just something that was taken out of thin air, but I didn't want to use that image because, and as a result, we created our own one. So the other thing about faster and harder breathing is that it increased sympathetic drive. We've had endurance athletes switch to nasal breathing, and they've tracked their heart rate variability across ultramarathons. And their HRV is more optimal when their body has adapted to nasal breathing during physical exercise. And you might say, what are you saying to breathe through your nose during all application of exercise? No, I'm saying that zone 2, especially the training zone to build up the aerobic base, is perfect for nasal breathing. And maybe that's why some of the athletes in the Tour de France were wearing nasal dilators. Because if you can train with your mouth closed, you can cause a lot of adaptations to improve your breathing system. Because if you want to train anything, you have to add an extra load onto it. You know, you can't just go through the motions. If you want to train something, you have to target specifically that thing that you want to train. If you want to train attention, you have to target attention. But you also have to look at the factors that are influencing attention. So, you know, the increased sympathetic arousal and also the increased rate of perceived exertion. So I'd like you to give this a go. This is Bolt score. It's not perfect. It's an indicator of your chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. It'll also take into consideration the fear response towards air hunger. Now, this is only one test, and this test was looked at in a paper by Kyle Kiesel. He looked at 51 individuals, and he looked at their breathing from a biochemical point of view, a biomechanical point of view, and a psychophysiological point of view. And his conclusion was that if your Bolt score or control pause, if it's greater than 25 seconds, there's an 89% chance that your breathing is functional. So I'd like you to give this a go. It's a very simple screening tool, and that was his conclusion. And no screening tool is perfect, and we don't just rely on this, but at the same time, it gives us some feedback. So if you're sitting there comfortably, take a normal breath in and out through your nose, and then you can hold your nose to stop breathing. And time within seconds how long you can hold your breath for and still have normal breathing when you resume breathing. So it's not a test of your maximum breath hold time. It's only a test to see how long can you hold your breath for and still have normal breathing when you resume breathing. So that's the key. When you resume breathing, your breathing should be normal. You shouldn't have catch-up breaths because then you've pushed it. If you are working in fitness or working in health and you want to see the application of breathing, specifically designed programs with 23 years of experience, what I would like to do is just direct you to this slide. So there's two levels. Level 1 is all online. Level 1, foundational, functional breathing. So that's the foundational breathing. That's your 3 dimensions of breathing. That's looking at airway, looking at sleep, and looking at heart rate variability. And it's a really well-developed training portal. So the modules are quite easy to navigate. There's a PowerPoint. There's a video of me explaining the PowerPoint, and then there's a quiz. So it's both theory and practice. And I think the science is really, really important with breathing. And because people now are, of course, very, very educated. And if you're asking them to do something, well, you need to know why you want to do it. And you need to also be able to tailor breathing exercise according to that individual. And you're going to tailor them according to, of course, their breathing patterns. But how do you assess their breathing patterns? So the foundational is all about assessing breathing and tailoring breathing to that person. And then we have breathing for yoga as well. So this is specifically integrating breathing for yoga practice for yoga instructors. And breathing in yoga changed since 1880. So a lot of that in terms of the application of breathing is going back to the original foundations of breathing in yoga, which is dating maybe 2,000 years ago, or could be even 5,000 years ago. So level 1 and level 2, the talk about today is really about the advanced training. So that's combining both level 1 and level 2. And that comes with 21 advanced modules, but also 7 live sessions with myself in a classroom environment by Zoom. And we also have a monthly refresher. The price is very accessible. So we have kept the prices very, very accessible. And we have a great community of people as well, great sharing of information. And you can see that the cost of that course is $876. That's provided that you use the code fitness20, and that's valid for 7 days. And for 24 hours, then there's a free starter pack. That's with the advanced, I think. Maybe it's with all, but Neve can, it's when you join the advanced instructor training in the next 24 hours, and you can see what you can get there. So we use the sports mask to improve respiratory muscle strength. We use the nasal dilator to help flare up, open the nostrils to make nasal breathing easier. We use a pulse oximeter for simulation of altitude training. We use myotape for getting the mouth closed during sleep. And then you have a breathing belt for resistance to breathing and improving breathing patterns. And of course, then you have an Oxygen Advantage t-shirt. So it's a goodie pack. I'm going to bring on Barry Monaghan. So just Barry, I met quite some time ago, and Barry I accompanied Barry, or either way, to the talk in Lille, and Barry is a performance coach. So it's better that Barry introduces himself and gives you a little bit of background information and the application of breathing in sports.
Hi, everybody. So from a cycling perspective, I've had a long career and relationship with cycling. I started racing in, believe it or not, 1978 when I was 10 years of age, and I've continued with the sport right up to now, both racing up to my late 20s, early 30s, and then eventually moved into coaching and also team management. So I've spent probably the last 15 to 20 years working directly with athletes, with bike riders, right from recreational level right up to international level. And then I also work with my governing body here in Ireland, Cycling Ireland, as the national coach for the women's elite team, women's under 23, and the women's junior team. So that brief is more of a team management more than anything else, where I travel to European Championships, World Championships, and so on, and prepare the team for that. From the breathing perspective, I trained with Patrick in January 2022 in Galway. And actually, the reason I went, it wasn't for performance reasons, it wasn't for anything related to cycling, it was simply because I had some health issues myself. I had ongoing asthma that had been a problem for 10 or 15 years and had been particularly restrictive post-COVID, to the point where I couldn't ride the bike or couldn't run, all things I still enjoy doing. So I went along at the behest of a friend of mine, who had recommended Patrick. I'd done a bit of research in advance, went along to the course, and without blowing his trumpet now, it really blew me away what he talked about. And as a result, they came back, and a lot of the techniques that he talks about on the course and stuff, I really drilled down in them from my own perspective, to the point now where 3 years later, genuinely, that the asthma's gone completely. I have no use of inhalers. I'm back training, as much as I can at 56 years of age. So, it was a game changer for me. And then I suppose in the last 6 to 12 months, particularly in the last 6 months, I've really started to apply some of the techniques from the performance perspective and my own athletes as well. Right from, the basic stuff like breathe light for recovery, right up to the hypoxic, the breath holds, and so on for more performance stuff. And again, and from that perspective, it's myself and Patrick were talking about this when we were away. I think we're still finding out where we can go with that. Certainly I am anyway, but the initial results and the initial feedback and the general, my general feeling and the anecdotes that I'm getting is that it's really positive, and to bring in some of the techniques on a regular basis. One of the things I talked about with Patrick that I see in being around cycling for a long time, there's a wealth of data available now in cycling. It's just bombarded with metrics. More and more metrics are available from power, heart rate, heart rate variability, everything. But I think sometimes we've lost a little bit of touch that these are human beings. So some of the techniques now that I use that Patrick has trained me on is actually to bring the athletes down a wee bit, is to down regulate them a little bit because they're switched on all the time. From obviously competing and then post competing, looking at data, analyzing data, and then obviously just day to day stuff like social media and all the normal stuff that people are dealing with nowadays. Actually, one of the big strengths I think from the techniques that Patrick has taught me is actually to bring the athletes back a little bit, to focus on the recovery, to switch off from the racing end of things. If you look at the tour at the minute, they're now 2 and a bit weeks into the Tour de France. There's still 5 days to go. And you can only imagine what the athletes are going through. The stages are 4 to 5 hours every day. They're then driving to their accommodation. There's very little time to recover. So, and there's a lot of media and stuff like that as well. They're always switched on. So for me, using a lot of the stuff that Patrick's doing, that Oxygen Vantage is doing, is actually to switch the athlete off a little bit, to bring them back a little bit, to ground them again, because they're always, always on it all the time. And that's a big, big problem. It's a problem I'm seeing a lot more of in sport in general and cycling specifically, because I said we're swamped with data now. But from my perspective, I just think it's in the 3 years or so that I've been working with it, I honestly would say from my own perspective, it has changed my own life dramatically. And then from my own athlete's perspective, it's early stages yet, but the signs are very positive.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry. That was an amazing testimonial. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm just going to go back into this here. I am going to bring you through some practice, by the way. Now, this often when we first talk about training with nasal breathing, people they're really wondering, is it possible? And you have to think of the benefits of breathing in and out through the nose. Barry there talked about asthma. And it's not just necessarily having asthma or exercise-induced asthma, but how about cyclist cough? How about an athlete who puts a lot of miles in, and during all that time, they're breathing hard and fast, and they're taking cold, dry, unfiltered air into their mouth, which does nothing to filter that air, does nothing to moisten the air, does nothing to warm the air, does nothing to regulate volume. You could say it's trauma to the throat, but it's also trauma to the lungs, because moisture then is sucked out of the airways, and that in turn can contribute to airway narrowing. And the thing about airway narrowing is that when you feel that you're not getting enough air, you want to breathe harder and faster, but that's going to make it worse. So if you want to avoid exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, the whole point would be to train your everyday breathing patterns, so you don't need so much air for a given intensity and duration of physical exercise. And yes, there is a time to open it up, but the benefits that will have happened with nasal breathing, because nasal breathing is adding that load, it's restricted breathing, restricted ventilation to train your body to do physical exercise with less ventilation. If you want to breathe less during exercise, you should practice breathing less during physical exercise. It does protect the airways. It also increases carbon dioxide in the lungs and blood. Now that could have a beneficial effect in terms of heart health. George Dallam is a sports scientist. He wrote a paper recently. It's a hypothesis. And he said endurance athletes can be prone to cardiac fibrosing and atrial fibrillation. And he said that these individuals are doing a lot of miles and they have their mouths open and they're breathing hard and fast, but maybe that's getting rid of too much carbon dioxide. And maybe it's the loss of carbon dioxide that's reducing blood flow. And of course, you're not just reducing blood circulation to the legs, for example. You're also reducing blood circulation to the heart. So you're pushing the heart harder, but you're not giving the heart adequate blood supply at the same time. So there could be as well a health implication there. But there's many aspects to it. Nasal breathing activates the diaphragm better. Nasal breathing will also help to increase blood flow to the brain. Nasal breathing during physical exercise helps reduce the chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. But nasal breathing during physical exercise isn't enough, because you also have to train your everyday breathing patterns. But there's some of the things there. So you could say then, well, if I'm breathing less air, surely I'm going to have less oxygen getting to the working muscles. No, that's not correct. So Dallam's paper, again, he looked at 2018, and he found that there was no increase in lactate post-physical exercise as a result of nasal breathing. So, but the thing here is you have to give some time for the body to adapt to it, but the body does adapt to it. Now, his study, he looked at athletes, they were recreational athletes. He had them nose breathe for a period of 6 months only during exercise, which I would say is okay, it's okay. But what about their underlying breathing? And at the end of 6 months, in a graded exercise test, they were able to have the same work rate intensity. They were able to go into zone 5, maximum intensity exercise with nose breathing versus mouth breathing. And when he looked at their ventilation, they had 22% less ventilation. Well, if you have to breathe less air, you're not going to be wasting energy unnecessary, because every time we take a breath, there's an energy expended by the breathing muscles, by the respiratory system. And, you know, it's not just that your lungs and your diaphragm and your ribs are performing breathing, but they also need their own oxygen supply. So if you can do the same work rate with less ventilation so that you don't have to be then wasting so much energy, if kind of that makes sense. And also then you don't have the risk of the diaphragm getting tired. So a couple of other aspects, like when you think about breathing in a nutshell, I want to look at the application of breathing techniques in your everyday breathing, but also in sports, and not just going through the motions in sports. It's looking at the body, looking at the airway, looking at blood circulation, looking at oxygen delivery, looking at the diaphragm, looking at sleep, looking at recovery. And then the mind, training attention, training focus, reducing rumination, being able to self-regulate. If you're in a tricky situation, are you able to bring down your heart rate pretty quickly? Is it an integral part of you that you know it's there and there will be a comfort in you knowing that it's there? And then the whole aspect of bringing all this into sport, because then it's about improving both physical and mental performance. So nose breathing, light breathing, slow breathing, deep breathing. Light is about the biochemical dimension. Slow is about slowing down the respiratory rate to help bring balance to the autonomic nervous system. Deep is about having good recruitment of the diaphragm, but deep doesn't mean big. You don't have to overbreathe. You don't have to take full deep breaths. If you take full deep breaths and you're taking more air into your body, as I said, it doesn't mean that you have more oxygen being delivered to where it's needed. And then we do dynamic breath holds, and they're the stressor exercises. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to give this a go, but don't do this if you're pregnant. This is your maximum breathlessness test. So this is a maximum, this is a measure or an indicator of your maximum tolerance of breathlessness. So earlier on, we looked at the BOLT score, which gives you feedback of your functional breathing patterns. And the MBT then is really when you're pushing it. So what I would like you to do is to take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose. And if you are able to walk as many paces as you can, pushing it, but able to recover within 2 to 3 breaths. In other words, don't do it until you go blue. Now, if you have any serious medical conditions, please don't do it. If you're pregnant, please don't do it. If you're prone to panic disorder or anxiety, please don't do it. Because the reason being is because with many people, if your reaction to air hunger is quite strong, you need a graded approach. But I put it in anyway because it would be specifically or especially relevant to athletes. So what do we need an athlete to be able to achieve? We want them to be able to walk for 80 paces with their breath held and to recover within 2 to 3 breaths. So there's 2 measures there. Well, there's more. You have diaphragm discomfort coming in, which will terminate the breath hold. So it's about bringing relaxation to the diaphragm. You also have the perception of breathlessness, exposing the mind to the increased sensation of air hunger and surrendering to that, being able to cope with breathlessness. You also have the buildup of carbon dioxide, and with this, you're going to have a drop in oxygen. So there's quite a few things coming into play that willpower too is going to play a role. So useful test in terms of your maximum capabilities to tolerate breathlessness. So dynamic breath holds, then we do a lot of dynamic breath holds. We wouldn't necessarily do them on the bike, but the objective would be is to do them on land, and we don't do them after hyperventilation. We do them after normal breathing. We have been practicing these for about 23 years. And the whole objective of a dynamic breath hold is we perform them during movement. And it's really an exhale hold. So we take a normal breath in and out through the nose and pinch the nose and start walking or jogging with the breath held. And then just keep on relaxing into that and building it up and building it up and building it up and keep going with the air hunger and going until maximum, in terms of building up quite a strong air hunger and then being able to breathe in and out through the nose at the end of it. And that's an amazing exercise because it can do so much and it can train your breathing patterns too, not just from a biochemical point of view, but also it does add an extra load onto the diaphragm, but also a psychophysiological point of view. Now, one of the major benefits of doing that exercise is that when you expose your body to high CO2 and low oxygen, it will disturb the blood acid-base balance. And that in turn is going to cause adaptations, likely in the muscle compartment. So there are various buffers to bind with hydrogen ion to help delay lactic acid and fatigue. So what we're doing here is we're really stimulating anaerobic glycolysis way beyond what you would experience during a sprint. If you sprint with your mouth open, your blood oxygen saturation will hardly drop. Your carbon dioxide isn't going to increase at all. But if you do a breath hold, you have a much stronger effect in terms of stimulating anaerobic glycolysis. And this then is going to cause the body to make adaptations to improve the buffering capacity, likely inside in the muscle compartment. And with an increased buffering capacity, then you're able to delay lactic acid and fatigue. So it helps also dilate the airways. We can show how to open up the airways, etc., and the things I spoke about there. And one paper by a French researcher in team sports had a group of 21 rugby players, divided them into two groups. One did 4 weeks of sprinting with their mouth open. The other did 4 weeks of sprinting with their mouth closed, but breath holds, breath holding as I described. And these were rugby union players, professional, during peak season. So these are top of the top. Their repeated sprintability in the group that were just running with their mouths open, so they were doing 40-meter sprints with their mouth open, their repeated sprintability increased from 9 reps to about 10 reps over the course of 4 weeks. The group who were doing exhale hold 40-minute sprints, 40-meter sprints, in other words, taking a breath in through their nose and out through their nose and holding their breath and sprinting for 40 meters with a breath hold and doing a number of reps per set and 2 sets per week. They increased their repeated sprintability before exhaustion from 9 reps to 14.8 reps. There was a 64% increase in their ability to sprint, repeated sprintability. And repeated sprintability is a performance indicator in team sports and in other sports as well. So it's your ability to go out almost near maximum effort, followed by a very brief recovery before you do it again. So again, if you're, it's really about using targeted breathwork practice to cause adaptations in various areas. And it's never just about, yes, functional breathing is great, but this stuff is also brilliant. And it is from a psychological point of view as well, because whenever you're focusing on the breath, when you even have your attention on your breathing and you're holding your attention there, and whenever your mind wanders and you bring your attention back, you're helping to strengthen your ability to hold attention. That's one aspect of it. But again, surrendering to the sensation of air hunger and surrendering to discomfort and training your brain not to react to that. That's another aspect, because that's a hormetic stress, also not just a physiological point of view, but a psychological point of view. So just to give a recap, and I'm going to go through some exercises, and I'll also go through some questions, or I'll try and answer any questions that you have. So we have a little bit to go yet. So we're going to continue for about 40 minutes more or thereabouts. But if you are considering bringing breathing into what you already do, we'd love for you to do your training with us. And you have different options there. Like the level 1 is foundational. It's a pretty good course, in fairness, and it's the basic foundational. Getting the foundation right is very, very important. Sometimes I often feel with breathing, what gets a lot of attention is the hyperventilation, long breath holds, because there's something for somebody to see. And of course, when you do it, it can generate euphoric sensations. But the question to ask is, and that can be very helpful for people. So, for example, to release trauma, to experience the symptoms of hyperventilation in a safe setting. So there's a lot of positives with that. But what I would also say is the foundational stuff is also very important. And especially stuff that you can apply, that you can bring it into your existing training. you know, that you're already training. Like physical training should never be just training for the body. It should be training for your breathing patterns, because all you have to do is interweave this in with what you're already doing. But it should also be a training for the brain. You know, why just go through physical training and go through the motions of it? You could really stack up and get more benefits out of it, because even say, for example, if you were saying, well, I want to get people out of my head. Well, how do you get people out of their head? You know, you have to direct attention to the senses. You can either bring attention into the body or onto the breath. Okay, it's one way of doing it. Or you bring it into present moment awareness. And people talk about present moment awareness, but what does it mean? The ability to be able to hold your attention in the exclusion of thought, that there's no veil of thought between you and what you're doing. And that's a very important aspect of it, because a lot of people, even when they hold attention to the breath, they'll be thinking about their breath, or they bring their attention into present moment, but they're still analyzing everything that's around them. And you can learn to stop thinking. I have been able to reduce my thought activity by about 30 to 40%. Now, how did I do it? I just practiced this stuff here. So anything that you want to improve, you have to work on. And if you want to improve your ability to hold your attention, you have to work on that. But where do you start? You start with holding your attention. Your mind wanders off, you bring it back. And the breath is a great place to do it. But even just going for a run with your mouth closed, you know, you'll have increased carbon dioxide in the lungs and blood. That will result in increased blood flow to the brain, probably between 5 and 10% increased blood flow to the brain. That's going to have a calming effect on the brain, because the increase of carbon dioxide and the slight drop to blood pH reduces brain cell excitability. Now, that would be a different story than a runner who's breathing with an open mouth, breathing fast and shallow, and possibly even over-breathing. So if your Bolt score is less than 25 seconds, it indicates that your breathing is dysfunctional. It has room for improvement. I know dysfunctional isn't a great word, but that's the word that's in the research. So if you have then dysfunctional breathing, and say you have a Bolt score of 15 seconds, and that would indicate that, yes, breathing is a bit faster and harder on upper chest, well, that's the way you're going to be breathing during exercise. So could you be running the risk of breathing too much air during physical exercise, and what is that doing? And yes, you can achieve medals, but at what cost? So it's all about the balance between, I suppose, longevity, you know, being able to push yourself, but doing it right. And, you know, not overdoing it, not taxing the system to the point that there's no going back. And I've seen it with athletes, and I've seen them develop chronic fatigue syndrome and serious mental health issues from pushing it and taxing their system and not enough recovery. But it's not even just about the recovery. What about getting the foundation right so that you can push yourself a bit harder, because your body has adapted to that, and breathing is one aspect there. So yeah, so coming back anyway, the advanced then is the 7 by 2 hour session. So we meet up. We also meet up every month. So normally, every 4 weeks or so, we have an hour or an hour and a half of a meeting. And this is a time for instructors to ask questions and tease different things out. And of course, we've got quite an array of instructors. If you look at Oxygen Advantage and just go to the instructor, well, you could look at the master instructors first, or go to the instructors, advanced instructors, and see the typical profile of the individuals there. And you'll see from all walks of life, you know, and high profile individuals. So I went through that. That's a little goodie bag. So that would be an incentive, for example, if you were to go with the advanced in the next 24 hours or so. So you get about $150 worth of material and different things. Now, if you want to bring this, which I would absolutely encourage you to do, to bring it into your sports, start tracking your Bolt score. And even with females as well, because breathing for females is different to breathing for men. And that's a very important thing that needs to be covered in sports, you know, especially when you think of the different phases of the monthly cycle. If you're thinking about menstruation, then the follicular phase, proliferation, ovulation, mid-luteal phase. So mid-luteal phase, there's an increase in progesterone, which is a respiratory stimulant. And that can then result in faster and harder breathing. And carbon dioxide levels can drop by as much as 25%. So the female then may be more susceptible to breathlessness, but also anxiety and panic disorder, and different symptoms are resulting from hyperventilation. So tracking your Bolt score gives you some feedback of how you are breathing at that point. And while the Bolt score, yes, it can be varied by different things, For females, there's more variable because of the changes of hormones and the impact that can have on your breathing. Nasal breathing during physical exercise for zone 2 and zone 3. And if you continue breathing in and out through your nose during exercise, yes, you can transition into zone 4 with nasal breathing only. But it's not that we are saying to breathe exclusively through your nose during all zones. No, we're saying add nose breathing to your training sessions to cause the body to make adaptations, because then you are targeting the drivers to breathe. And those adaptations then will carry into when you have to really push it. So if you want to be able to push yourself during zone 5, think of improving your training breathing during zone 2. Dynamic apnea is very important. And then training the diaphragm with resistance tools. Nose breathing does add a load, but Sports Mask was a product I developed a few years ago that really adds a load to your breathing, because you're breathing against resistance, both from a biochemical and a biomechanical point of view. And then breathing exercise to down-regulate. Barry talked about recovery being very, very important. And sleep. Many athletes are waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. I would genuinely say a game changer in sleep, getting the mouth closed. I started taping my own mouth closed in 1997. I used a nasal dilator, and at the time I was wearing 3M 1-inch micropore tape, and it was phenomenal, the difference it made to my sleep. Absolutely phenomenal. And now mouth taping has gone viral, but you know, and it's never about forcing nasal breathing. It's never about just slapping on a piece of tape in the mouth. That's why I brought out myotape, that it's safer, because we always have to think of safety. And if you're dealing with an athlete, you don't want to be posing any risk to that individual by covering their mouth, because if they have a sleep disorder breathing, such as sleep apnea, if they need to mouth puff, they have to be able to mouth puff. Otherwise, you could worsen their sleep. So there are safety considerations that are very, very important. You know, and I know social media, mouth taping has gone viral, and yes, there's a greater awareness there and people are feeling benefits, but look a little bit deeper into the science of it, and consider, who are you working with? Could your athlete be at a risk of sleep disorder breathing? And don't cover the mouth specifically, but wear a tape surrounding the mouth. And the one tape that we have then is myotape, of course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do the breathe light exercise. And you might be interested in this, because very often with breathing, what gets the attention is the fuller breaths. But how if you breathe a little bit less air? And what impact can this make on your physiology? So what I would like you to do is put one hand on your chest and one hand just above your navel, and tune in on your breathing. So bring your attention to your breath. This can also be a good exercise for being able to hold your attention on something. So can you start with your breath? And of course, your mind wanders. That's normal. And every time your mind wanders and you bring it back, then the good stuff is happening. You know, if you train yourself to be distracted all day long, well, guess what? You're going to be distracted all day long. Mobile phone, distraction device. But if you want to develop your capacity to be able to hold attention, this is what we have to train. So you have your attention on your breathing, and anytime your mind wanders, you bring your attention back. But now what I would like you to do is to really soften and slow down the speed of the air coming into your nose. I'm going to have you under breathe, and I want to see, does it make a change in how you're feeling? So take a really, really soft, gentle breath of air into your nose, and then have a relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out. So the whole purpose here is, by softening the breath in, almost breathing in hardly any air. You know, you can imagine if you were in a room full of people and there was a limited supply of air. I want you to breathe hardly any air into your nose. So you're breathing hardly any air into your nose, and then to have a relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out. And you're doing it correctly if you feel a sensation of breathlessness. So you don't have to just experience breathlessness by doing physical exercise. What we're doing here is generating breathlessness during rest. Now, the breathlessness that you experience tells you that carbon dioxide is accumulated in your lungs and blood. And even though you're breathing less air, it doesn't mean that you've got less oxygen delivery throughout the body, because your blood circulation now is going to dilate in response to that. Keep breathing less air, and see if you can improve the circulation of your hands. Now, I know your hands are against your body, but I'm talking internally. You know, can you feel a sense that, yes, you're breathing less air? Can you feel your temperature increasing? Now, your 50,000 miles of blood vessels are influenced by carbon dioxide. But if you have dysfunctional breathing at rest, you run the risk of dysfunctional breathing during physical exercise. And yes, you are pushing yourself hard, but restricted blood flow could be possible because of the lowering of carbon dioxide. So here what we're doing is just going through the benefits of CO2. You have less breathing. You're breathing less air. Does the temperature of the hands change? Check in on the mouth. So even though you feel air hunger, check in on your mouth. And air hunger is a little bit of a stressor, of course. It's not the most comfortable exercise, but it's one to surrender to. Has your mouth gone dry, which would indicate activation of a fight or flight response? Is the saliva the same, or do you have increased watery saliva in the mouth? So whenever we think about stress and we think about the autonomic nervous system, it's like a seesaw. So when one side goes down, the other side goes up. And if we're in this increased stress response, what we want to do is we want to dampen the stress response and activate the relaxation response, because this is about recovery and ability to bring the autonomic nervous system into balance. So people will traditionally say, well, there's the rest and digest response, or you have the fight or flight response. How might you know if you're activating a rest or a digest response? Well, if your body is ready for digestion of food, it produces more watery saliva. So a very good indicator of whether you're activating the rest and digest response is whether your mouth responds that way. The other aspect about the rest response is if you feel sleepy. So say, for example, we would have strategies then for helping people to get to sleep quicker, because insomnia can be present in high performance. And also you might have an individual that wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's rumination of the mind. How can you activate the rest and digest response and take the pressure of you trying to fall asleep? If you try and fall asleep, it's not going to happen. You have to allow sleep to happen. But we can do that by telling the brain that we are safe. So if you can continue with this exercise for about 1 minute more. So if your mind wanders, bring your attention back. And don't worry when your mind wanders. That's what minds do. But I need you to be so aware of where your mind is at, that if the mind wanders, then you're bringing your attention back. And now you're helping to strengthen your ability to hold attention. You're developing this muscle, and attention is a muscle. It's something that we do need to develop. So you're taking a very, very soft and slow, gentle breath in through your nose. And you're having a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out. Can you soften and slow down the speed of your breathing to the point that you feel air hunger, that you would like to take in a deeper breath? But don't go so far that you have involuntary contractions of the diaphragm. So don't worry, you probably have gone too far, but that's okay. So if you have involuntary contractions of the diaphragm, you take a rest for about 20 seconds and then you start again. We need to get the sweet spot, not too little, not too much, just right. So it does take a degree of concentration. You're softening and slowing down the speed of the exhalation. Now, this too will stimulate the vagus nerve. It's likely helping to strengthen the bar reflex, and this is how we can optimize heart rate variability. But also, you're helping to reduce the chemical driver to breathe. So if you remember, what are the main drivers to breathe that we looked on the second slide? The very first one, which was the biggest one, the primary driver to breathe is carbon dioxide sensitivity. But how do you reduce your sensitivity to carbon dioxide? If you want to reduce your sensitivity to carbon dioxide, you need to expose your body to increased CO2. And then that will train the brain. So your brain adapts to the increased CO2 during rest, during exercise. And also when you have a reduced chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, it can help with your sleep. Okay, take a rest of that. Take a rest. So now what I would like you to, I'm just curious in terms of chat. Did anybody notice, was their mouth dry? Was there increased watery saliva in the mouth? Were your hands cold? Were your hands warmer? And don't just say it because you think it's going to make me feel better. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm just curious as a group of individuals, because for some of you, it's going to be your first time doing reduced volume breathing. But how did you respond to it? Now, the air hunger, by the way, it can actually cause, if you find with the air hunger that it caused a stress response, that's going to be really interesting for you, because it's telling you that your body is quite reactive to that psychological sensation of air hunger. And oftentimes I'll find that maybe, say, if somebody has a predisposition to panic disorder, I have to be very careful with that person, because, when we feel air hunger, I don't have panic disorder, thankfully, but when I feel air hunger, yeah, it can be a bit uncomfortable. But for somebody who is prone to panic disorder, or somebody who may have had maybe a near drowning accident when they were a kid or something, when they feel that same degree of air hunger, that can elicit such a fear response. But you don't want that person during physical exercise reacting to that air hunger that way, because that's going to hold them back. So that's why we want to give a dose of air hunger, not just to train breathing from a biochemical point of view, but also from a psychophysiological point of view. That mind-body connection is very important. So now what I would like you to do is, if you feel comfortable, is to stand up. And I would like you to start walking on the spot with your mouth closed. And what we're going to do is do some controlled breath holds. So earlier on, I said that, if you do some breath holds, you can help open up the airway. So now, just for you to start walking with your mouth closed and bringing your attention out of your mind and onto your breathing. So again, don't just go through the motions. I don't want you walking with your mouth closed but thinking about something else. I would like you walking with your mouth closed but holding your attention on that. And this is where we start bringing in the mind aspect of it during training. If you're going to do something, do it with 100% of your ability. And if you want to do it with 100% of your ability, you have to hold your attention on doing what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just going through the motions. And yes, the mind wanders, bring your attention back. And that's okay, the mind does wander, but you have to use this as an ability to strengthen the brain. So physical exercise is never just training for the body. It's training for your breathing, and it's training for your brain. So now what I would like you to do is to take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and walk holding your breath for about 10 paces. So now walk holding your breath for 10 paces. And then to let go, but to breathe in through your nose, and to continue breathing normally in and out through your nose for about a half a minute or so. So what I would say is, if you do have any serious medical conditions, go easy with this exercise. This is going to be a stressor exercise. It's not going to be suitable for everybody. So listen to your body. Don't listen to me. Yeah. If you're pregnant, please don't do this exercise. If you have panic disorder, don't go beyond 10 paces. So if you feel that you have quite strong a fear response to air hunger, go easy, because you can help to alleviate that, but you have to do it in a dose-dependent way. So now 15 paces, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and walk holding your breath for 15 paces. So you're walking, holding your breath for 15 paces. Then to let go, but to breathe in through your nose, and then to breathe normally for about a half a minute to a minute. So what will this exercise do? This is preparation for the simulation of altitude exercise, for hypoxic hypercapnic training. But you might start to notice that your nose opens up a little bit with this exercise. But it's not just going to be your nose, your lungs will start opening up a little bit. So remember, I spoke about cyclists' cough earlier on. So can you interweave a breathing practice into a warm-up to help open up the airways prior to doing physical exercise? A warm-up should never be about warming the muscles. A warm-up should be about opening up the airways, improving blood circulation, increasing oxygen delivery, helping to bring balance to the autonomic nervous system, especially if the individual is in too much of a stress response. And you don't have to mention pre-match anxiety to them, because that might give you a push, that you might get pushback. You can help to bring that person into a right frame of mind by bringing breathing into the warm-up. So now what I would like you to do is breathe in and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and now walk holding your breath for 20 paces. So walk holding your breath for 20 paces. And relax into the body. Should be okay for most of you. Then to let go, but to breathe in through your nose, and continue walking, breathing in and out through your nose. Now I'm going to continue with this until we get about 50 paces. But remember what I said, athletes should be able to achieve 80 paces. But they're not going to achieve 80 paces straight off the bat. So now you're breathing in and out through your nose. And where is your attention? Are you now thinking about something other than what you're doing? Has your mind wandered? You don't want your mind to be wandering. So this is an exercise also to keep bringing your attention back. And we as human beings, we spend 50% of our time stuck in our head. And if we spend 50% of our time stuck in our head, well, then we are not having our attention on what we're doing. So now 25 paces. Take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose. And now I would like you to jog holding your breath. So jog holding your breath for 25 paces. Jogging, holding your breath for 25 paces. And then to let go, to breathe in through your nose, and then to breathe normally in and out through your nose. So always breathing in and out through your nose at the end. If you had to open your mouth, you've pushed it too far. Now, everybody is going to be different with this one. Some of you will be able to do 25 paces easy. Some of you might struggle. It doesn't matter. The whole thing is challenge yourself just a little bit. So now you're just moving, walking with your mouth closed, breathing in and out through your nose, ideally holding your attention and doing what you're doing and not thinking about anything else. And now for 30 paces. Take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and start walking, holding your breath, and go from a walk into a fast walk, into a jog, into a fast jog, holding your breath for 30 paces. So you keep relaxing into the body, keep relaxing, keep going, keep pushing, and then letting go, but breathing in and out through your nose. Now what I would like you to do as you walk, test each side of your nose. Block one side of your nose and breathe through the other side, and then switch sides. And just see, does your nose feel more open? So it's not just going to be your nose that can feel more open, but your lungs as well. So you do have control over your airways by bringing in breathing practice. And if you have a stuffy nose, you never just have a stuffy nose. You're also more likely to have poor sleep. So say, for example, you have an athlete and they're prone to hay fever, and that hay fever results in nasal congestion. Well, their sleep is going to be impacted, and their cognitive ability is going to be impacted as well. So it's very important that we have techniques to be able to alleviate nasal congestion. So now what I would like you to do is hold your breath for 40 paces. Yeah. Take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and start jogging now, holding your breath for 40 paces. And as the air hunger increases, keep relaxing into the body and keep going, keep pushing, keep going, keep pushing. And then let go, but breathe in through your nose, and don't overdo it. Don't listen to me. Listen to your body. Listen to your body. Because again, you want to feel safe. This is a stressor. So we just gently want to kind of dial it up. So now you're breathing in and out through your nose. Again, if your mind wanders off, bring your attention back. And you might have noticed during the breath hold that whenever you're doing the breath hold, that your mind quietens. So it can be a very good strategy as well to help interrupt rumination of the mind. And the other aspect with this breath hold, this is a stressor. This is increasing blood flow to the brain. You're holding your breath. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the lungs and blood. That increases blood flow to the brain. But also as you hold your breath, now your blood oxygen saturation is dropping. And as long as you don't go below 70% SpO2, you will have an increase of blood flow to the brain as a result of that. You might notice your hands go cold. So during the breath hold, the diving response can kick in. And you don't have to be in water to elicit that. So now we do 45 paces. So for those of you who are brave enough, but also listen to your body, take a normal breath in through your nose, out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose. Walk, fast walk, jog, fast jog into your body. Keep going, keep pushing, keep going, keep pushing, keep going, keep pushing. Keep relaxing into the air hunger. So there's a psychological stress here, and there's a physiological stress. But then to let go, to breathe in through your nose, and then you're breathing normally in and out through your nose. So now what I would like you to do is I'm not going to go any more with this because some of you might get a headache if we overdo it. So I'd like you now just walking for a little bit, slowing down your breathing. So you might have felt that your heart rate, if you look at your heart rate just at the angle of your jaw, and you're feeling the speed of your heart rate, now what I would like you to do is to start slowing down the speed of your exhalation. So pay attention to your heart rate and pay attention to your breathing. And if you take a soft breath in through your nose and a slow, relaxed exhalation, you help to stimulate the vagus nerve to secrete neurotransmitter called acetylcholine to bring down the speed of your heart rate. So that can help with recovery. Okay, so I'm going to bring everybody back to the chair. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. So I'm done, and it's up to you then to ask me some questions. So what I will try and do is I will try and answer your questions over the next 20 minutes or so. You could unmute yourself or you can put it into the chat, whatever you feel. By the way, did anybody feel if their nose is more open now?
Yeah, my nose is
Definitely.
more open.
Great, great, great. So just it kind of gives you an idea. So really what I wanted to do here was just to show, like, I often feel that breathing is totally forgotten about. And I can understand because it's not always taught in a great way. The language that's used is very often woo-woo and too left of field. It's not based with experience or science, so I think there's a massive function modality with respiration. And I am going to make a prediction in the next 5 years, it's going to be in sports. I am in no doubt, absolutely no doubt, and maybe before 5 years. But at the moment, it's early adopters that are using it. So Neve or Simon, I might as well go with you.
Yeah. Hi. Earlier, towards the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned flow. And I just wondered if you could sort of define what flow is. I mean, I think we've all got a bit of an idea, but I think in relation to breathing and getting rid of the obstacles to flow, where we're operating in the
So
obstacles.
flow, the concept flow was developed by a Hungarian psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And it's a state of effortless ease that you're so immersed in what you're doing. And you have 100% of your attention. So if we think of human beings, we communicate with life through our senses, through our sense of sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. And that you're so immersed with what you're doing that there's no differentiation between the task and the doer. Now, at that point there, the thinking mind has subsided. So even if there's a thought that comes in, the thought doesn't convert to thinking. It's the ability to be able to quieten the mind, to direct all of your attention on doing what you're doing. I can do it. It can be reproduced at will. I can reproduce it now. And just literally what I often do as well, I shift my attention towards the back of the head and I hold my attention there. So it's almost that I also get my attention out of the thinking mind, but I disperse my attention throughout the body. So I use my body then as an anchor for my attention. So by getting the thinking mind out of the way, because the thinking mind is too slow, and the thinking mind, the problem with it is that it can often come with a little bit of negativity and self-doubt, and it can sabotage your performance because it can tell us things that we're not capable or we're not good enough or something wrong is here or that. We need to get the thinking mind out of the way because any athlete, they've put years and years and years of work into doing what they're doing. They need to get out of their own way. The problem is too often they're in their own way because they can't get the I out of the way. So it's something that you develop, but I would genuinely say, in terms of accessing flow states, anxiety is a sabotage of flow. And if you have an individual with dysfunctional breathing patterns, and if their autonomic nervous system is in an increased stress response, I don't think they will access flow as readily. And sleep is a huge one. I spoke earlier on about nose breathing during sleep, and I believe Matthew Walker just put a post about nose breathing. So he would be one of the most famous sleep specialists in the world. Now he's talking about nasal breathing during sleep, which is huge because nose breathing now is getting the recognition. We were talking about it 25 years ago. So all of these things come together, Simon. If we want to be able to be in that state of mind, the body and the brain needs to feel safe. And of course, a certain amount of stress is good. But the problem is if stress is just a little bit too much, we then go into a fight or flight response. So the question for an individual going into a situation, how is their body reacting to the challenges of that situation? And do they have the tools to be able to self-regulate? or are they going into that situation unknowingly breathing a bit too fast and hard? I'll give you an example. Nigel Beach was working, he's one of our master instructors. He was working with a world-class golfer. The individual was walking down the fairway, and when he was coming to taking his shots, he was kind of messing up his shots. So then they tracked his data the following day. His heart rate while walking down the fairway was 160 beats per minute. Now he's only walking, so his heart rate maybe should be only about 80 or 90 beats, or maybe 100 at the top. But his heart rate was 160 beats per minute. There's an example of fight or flight response, and that is absolutely going to affect his game. So there would be a way of using breathing in that instance to be able to, this is where functional breathing also is very important. It's not just what you do on the course, but it's what you're doing outside the course. You know, if somebody is expected to have good breathing patterns and good states of mind during competition, they need to be thinking about this outside of competition, because how you perform in competition is going to be influenced by how you perform outside of it. Yeah, that helps. I have a book called Atomic Focus, which kind of interweaves all of that. And there's two videos up on YouTube. One is Atomic Focus Breathing, and the other is Atomic Focus Awareness. So you'll find that'll give you an insight into it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Anybody else?
Yes, hello. Hello, Patrick. Chris here.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Yeah. So I've been doing the Wim Hof method for about 3 years.
Yes.
So, you know, and it's only now I felt like I wouldn't say mastered it, but I've kind of reached a maximum sort of benefit from it. And I feel like I was looking for some new techniques and something new and different, because I felt there was so much to explore with the Wim Hof, but I felt like, you know, I just was really curious to see what other people are doing out there in terms of like different breathwork techniques. And obviously I came across you, and I just, yeah, I find that I feel like, you know, the Wim Hof has really kind of prepared me to really look at your course and really become an instructor and learn more of the biomechanics and really diving into this a bit more, because it's done a lot for me for mental health wise, and I mean, I suffer from addiction and various things, trauma, PTSD, and I've managed to get through it. I'm actually probably in, you know, the best place I've ever been, but it's taken a very long time to get there.
Right.
And I really want to give back, you know, I know that so many people right now are struggling in this world, and I think the breath is learning how to breathe properly is going to solve a lot of problems, or at least support them anyway. And you know, I'm just a passionate breather. Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, and I
So
just
I suppose, Chris,
yeah.
I suppose when it comes to breathing, it's really understanding about whatever way you alter the breath, what's it doing? Like ultimately, we're breathing, we have a breath in, we have a breath out. We have an inspiration, we have an expiration. If you breathe harder and faster, it's a stressor. If you hold your breath for a long time, it's a stressor. If you combine both, it's a stressor upon a stressor.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about recovery. So the recovery would be, say, functional breathing. And all of those aspects. So we use about 25 different breathing exercises. So there are breathing exercises to stress the body and mind, and there's breathing exercise for recovery, but also breathing exercises that are accessible. I never felt drawn to doing hyperventilation followed by breath holds. Never felt it, but maybe that's just my own personality. But I felt drawn to doing breath holding after normal breathing. I felt drawn more to the functional breathing. So I think breathing can be a very personal thing. So whoever you're going to be working with, what might work for one person may not work for another person. So it's more so having the tools. It's having the understanding that, yes, here you have somebody in front of you and you're able to prescribe, if I use, I don't know that word, but tailor a breathing exercise or provide them with a breathing exercise that's going to suit them. So it has to be tailored according to their age. I don't believe anybody over 60 should be doing hyperventilation followed by long breath holds. It's a big stress. You know, and at some point, you know, we should be crawling before we're sprinting. And with sometimes in breathing, people go straight into the sprint, but I think they should be backtracking a little bit, you know, that's just me. But yeah, Wim Hof is brilliant. We have so many different instructors. If you look at the Oxygen Advantage instructors and you put in Wim Hof, you'll probably see 30% of our instructors are also Wim Hof trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Yeah. Yeah. Do I leave it there, or do I let someone else come in, or do I? Yeah.
No, because I've only 15 minutes, Chris, so I might go to somebody else.
No,
But
but Patrick, thank you anyway. Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate your time.
Well done with your breathing journey.
Thank you.
I see there's a question here for exercise-induced laryngeal obstruction. So I suppose the question there to ask Tim is, could hyperventilation causing dehydration and cooling of the upper airways be contributing to that? And if the individual switched to nasal breathing, but also if they had a higher Bolt score, they didn't have to be breathing so hard and so fast for a given intensity of physical exercise. So my take on it, yes, if somebody was having upper airway issues, I would absolutely think about you can improve breathing patterns to help alleviate that. Because if you think of an athlete and if that person is breathing 50 breaths per minute, and if they are breathing 2 liters of air per breath, there's 100 liters of air going into their lungs per minute. That's a huge work rate. So there's a lot of conditioning to do there. So I would absolutely look at exercise-induced laryngeal obstruction and measure the person's breathing, look at their Bolt score, how are they breathing, and how hard and fast are they breathing during exercise? Do they have the mouth open? All the stuff that we talked about. Yeah. I have 2 questions. How often do you run the courses? We run the courses face-to-face, typically about 4 per year. So our current training is in Ireland, but we're also going to be opening in next year. We're going to be opening a training center in Malaga. So if any of you wants to enjoy the sun for a couple of weeks or for a week, Malaga, the doors are going to be open. We haven't set the dates there, but we also do the trainings online. So if Niamh is kind enough just to post when the next advanced training online is, they're typically every 3 months. And the thing about it is as well, once you do the online training, you're welcome to come back. There's no extra charge. So say, for example, you felt, well, I did the training, but there was a bit in it. Because you will actually learn by starting to teach. So it takes the pressure of you trying to learn everything in the 7 sessions. You come back and then you meet with us. That's why the monthly classes are there as well. So that's kind of that background too. Can I ask about sinus and allergy problems getting worse with nose breathing, please? So initially, when you switch to nasal breathing, there can be an adaptation. And it's not, Barry, about forcing the air into the nose, because if you're doing hard physical exercise and trying to force air into the nose, of course it could irritate the nose. So what we want to do is we want to have comfortable breathing in and out through the nose to add a challenge, but not to be extreme. So what I would suggest is do a nasal rinse as well with good quality sea salt. You could probably buy a mixture that's making sure that the water is absolutely sterilized, etc. And also, when if the sinus issues are happening as a result of doing physical exercise with the mouth closed, look at your everyday breathing patterns, improve that, but also wear a nasal dilator. So a nasal dilator is a little device that we use as well. That would answer Travis' question. Are nasal strips recommended for running? We used them. Like my own one here is this one. So I developed a nasal dilator a few years ago. And this is a plastic device that goes up into the nose. And the benefit of this is with physical exercise. So it's splinting open in my airway. So if you put one finger either side of your nostrils and you just flare open your nostrils, you'll feel it's easier. This is reusable. So you could use this for 6 months. You just wash it in lukewarm water. So you don't have to be buying the Breathe Right strips all the time. The Breathe Right strips, of course, work, but you can reuse that. So I'm just kind of scrolling up. I have a question regarding training with a football team. Does it make sense to implement breath holds into the regular weekly sprint session? I'm not talking about replicating. Yeah, I wouldn't replicate Warren's protocol. It's really extreme. It's more about adding a simple element I could. Yes, of course. Of course, Michael or Michelle. Of course. If the answer is yes, how can I clearly and convincingly explain the advantages of this kind of implementation to the conditioning coach? Because he's going to ask, what exactly is this going to give us? Well, send them the paper on repeated sprintability by Warons. You know, you can't argue and say it's being adapted. But also, don't just rely on repeated sprint. You know, in terms of, we have to be thinking about all aspects of breathing. But yeah, of course, it makes a whole lot of sense. You know, look at the physiology of what happens when we do a breath hold after the exhalation. We're adding an extra load onto the individual to cause adaptations. And you also have to make sure as well, any breathing practice, especially like holding the breath during physical exercise, is a stressor. You don't want to overdo it. I've made mistakes with people by doing it and overdoing it. So you have to take into consideration the person's reaction to air hunger, if they have any background issues such as panic disorder or anxiety. How is their underlying breathing pattern? What age are they? It's just different things, you know, and
Patrick, can I come in there as well?
Yes, Barry, hello.
Well, just to recommend to people as well that if you're particularly with a sports related, make sure that you try the techniques yourself actually in a sporting environment. You know, for example, if you're recommending somebody to do zone 2 running, zone 2 cycling base, you know, the first thing they're going to see is a runny nose, you know, and if you haven't done that, if you haven't actually physically done that exercise or gone out and tried to nasal breathe, you know, you won't experience that, and you won't see that, you know, and that's really important that if you're trying to recommend these for performance gains, you got to know the techniques down and really have tried them and seen the pitfalls, you know, and seeing how some people may adapt quicker and some may adapt a lot slower, you know. Particularly with endurance sport, they're spending a lot of time. You know, if you think of a cyclist training 4 or 5, 6 hours and for at the highest level in zone 2, you know, you got to get them ready for the fact that the nose will run. That's almost dead cert, you know.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. That's great. Thanks. Toner, hi.
Hi, Patrick, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, I was just curious, surprised I got to 45 there with the exercises, but I was just curious as to why the instruction was to exhale through the nose rather than the mouth. And I just wanted to, because I would have always, inhaled through the nose, out through the mouth. And I was just curious as to why the exhale was the nose in that instance. Any particular reason?
Yeah, because the mouth doesn't do anything when it comes to breathing. Zero. You know, if you were to look inside your mouth, you see your teeth, you see your gums, your hard palate, your soft palate, the back of the throat, and none of those things do anything for respiration. Your nose does everything. So when we have an exhale through the nose is recovering the heat and moisture from the exhale breath. And this also helps to keep the nose open. But also when you have an exhale through the nose, you have a natural slowing down of the exhalation. And this helps to induce relaxation, but it also gives enough time for the diaphragm to return back up to its resting position. Whereas if you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out through your mouth, it's likely that some people will be breathing faster because there's no resistance to the breath on the expiration. And a faster breath out is more of a stressor. No animal breathes in through their nose and out through their mouth. No human, when they're born, breathes in through their nose and out through the mouth. I understand during exercise that there's a point at which the air hunger gets too much, that you could switch from nose, and then if the air hunger is too much, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth to get rid of more carbon dioxide to alleviate air hunger. But there's a reason there. But other than that, we do everything with nose, yeah.
So yeah, because that's because at the moment I am actually cycling in zone 2, nasal breathing, mouth closed. But I just understood that, like, because you can actually exhale through closed lips, but should I be exhaling through my nose then? So like in nose, out nose when I'm
It depends.
riding along.
So I suppose when you're talking about cycling with your mouth closed, what I would be saying is look at your everyday breathing patterns as well. So
I would tend to always breathe through my nose, and I would tend to always have my mouth closed.
Right.
But I just always thought that you're meant to exhale through. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Should I just
Does it
stick
make
to
sense?
nose all the
Of
time?
course. Of course. Like
Okay, okay.
it absolutely doesn't make sense to just go straight off the bat breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. I think it might
Yeah.
have originated in India, whereby the
Mm,
temperatures were really, really hot, and
mm,
heat could leave the body through the breath by breathing out through the mouth. But if you're exercising in Ireland, you don't need to be breathing out through the mouth to alleviate body temperature. So what we
mm-hmm,
would say is alter your pace to sustain comfortable nasal breathing. But
mm,
if you want to ramp up the intensity a little bit and the air hunger is not possible to sustain with nasal breathing, but zone two
mm.
should be all nose breathing because it's a perfect zone.
It
You
is,
know,
it's much better because it heats the air, especially in winter,
oh,
you
it's
know, so
huge.
it's
There's
much
no
better. Yeah,
comparison.
for sure.
The human
Okay, well
nose
then,
has 30
nose
functions,
it is then. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks for
yeah,
clearing that up.
no problem.
The
Thank
other good
you.
thing with that, Patrick, as well, is that if you're trying to genuinely stay within that zone, because this is sometimes is a miscommunication with people, what does actually zone two mean? When they're using heart rate or in cycling, we're using power, but one of the main thing is that the perception should be, you should have an idea how that should feel in terms of the effort. Well, a very good way to keep that in check is actually nose breathe as well. If you find during zone two that you're striving for mouth breathing, it probably means that the effort is actually above the zone that you're trying to work within. If it's base work, if it's aerobic oxidation that you're looking for, if it's development of the foundation of aerobic fitness, then you're spending a lot of time in that zone. But a really good way to keep the perception, to keep that in that area, is the nose breathe. And once you feel as if you need to get out of that, the effort's probably stranded a little bit too high as well.
Great stuff. Thank you, Barry. Neve, is there any other questions that I'm missing here? Oh, I'm just looking at Simon. Or sorry, he's answering Chris there. Great. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Are there breath exercises in your program? Okay, we answered that one. Have you
Yeah.
worked with swimmers, Barry? Yes, we have. We have some world-class swimmers. Actually, if you look at the Oxygen Advantage instructor, we have a program for swimming. So if you think about all of the applications apply for swimming as well. And in the water, you don't want an athlete taking a breath every 3 or 5 strokes. You want to minimize breathing going across the pool because every breath that the athlete has to take, they lose propulsion in the water because it increases drag. So it's also about training that individual to be able to tolerate high carbon dioxide, but also having strong respiratory muscles because swimming, though, is an interesting sport. It does already add an extra load onto the swimmer. So it's likely that the sport itself is helping to condition breathing. But say, for example, if you have a swimmer who comes out of the pool and they are unknowingly mouth breathing, or if they have their mouth open for 6 or 8 hours during sleep, that too is going to impact them. So we would say that you can still train your breathing on land to improve your breathing from a biochemical point of view, from a biomechanical point of view, and also for recovery. You can use breath holds, so there's very similar application also in swimming. Now, during the act of swimming itself, it's not possible to sustain nasal breathing. It's just too uncomfortable because the water is going to come in through the nose, but you don't have to. So instead of taking a breath every 3 strokes, you might have a breath every 5 strokes or a breath every 7 strokes. So the question here is, if we want to train an athlete to be able to do physical exercise with less ventilation, we need to have them do physical exercise with less ventilation, because that's one way of conditioning the athlete to be able to do that. And we do that by exercise on land. So I don't typically mix breathing in the water because it's not safe. And unfortunately, there has been tragedies, plenty of them documented by individuals practicing breathing techniques in the water. It just isn't safe, but you don't have to practice them in the water. You can practice all of this on land to make the body has adaptations conducive to the water. But Dean Gladstone is former Bondi rescue. So he's master instructor, Oxygen Advantage. David Depler, world-class swimmer. I don't know exactly his background, but you will see it. So you'll see if you put in swimming into Oxygen Advantage instructors, you'll see that there's different sports, including swimming in there.
I think you answered Noel's question there as well. And just one final question that I've found in chat from Salvatore asks, what is the best breathing pattern for long distance runners during the run, for example, marathoners?
Yeah, I would check out the podcast that I did with a guy called Iher Veries. And Iher, there's a marathon called Barclay Marathons. It's one of the most difficult marathons on earth. You literally run for 60 hours. And only 26 people have completed this marathon since 1986. And the person who completed it about 1 or 2 years ago, I can't remember exactly, not this year, but the previous year, he came in first and he used the oxygen advantage to train. So he looked at that in terms of, here you have an endurance event, you have to conserve energy. And he trained his body to be able to do physical exercise with less ventilation. And he also, in the podcast, he will talk about competitors getting thrown off because he was doing physical exercise, but they could not pick up on his breathing. Never let your breathing give you away. So it's all about adding the load. If you want to condition your breathing to breathe less during physical exercise, so you have an economical saving there, just do that, what we spoke about. And always think about, it's never just the airflow that comes into the nose or mouth. You have to think downstream. So can you optimize your breathing, that instead of breathing fast and shallow and wasting so much air to dead space, that you can improve alveolar ventilation and gas exchange? So yeah, I think that could be a helpful podcast for you to listen, especially for endurance, because that's a marathon of all marathons. So that's called the Barclay Marathons, and his name is Ihor, Ihor Veries. So you'll see that podcast where he's talking about it. So great. So I think we're coming to a close. So I'd like to say thanks very much. Thank you for your interest in breathing. I hope that's been beneficial and that it kind of might arouse some curiosity. I will genuinely say there's something huge in the whole modality of breathing when properly applied and targeted in sports. I would really like to say a big thanks to Barry Monaghan. Barry, that was amazing. Thanks very much. And just for somebody, if anybody would like to see your website, what's your website, by the way?
My website,
Yes.
BarryMonaghanPerformance.com. It's not very up to date now, but it's there. If you've got nothing to do for a few minutes, by all means, have a look at it.
Thanks very much, Barry. So
Thanks.
yeah, so thanks very much. And if any of you are considering to bring breathing into your work, I'd love you to reach out to us. I think that you will be very happy with the application of breathing because it's very tailored, it's very specific, and it's very accessible. And that's the way breathing should be, both in the language and also in the ease of use and tailoring it to the person. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, Neve.